Hello and welcome to Japanese Politics 101 with CEO and Representative Director of Langley Esquire, Timothy Langley, and me, your host, Maya Matsuoka. With less than a week to the opening of the Olympics, the political powers that be continue to struggle with the vaccine rollout, the risk management with regard to the Olympic athletes, and the factional fighting within the LDP. This has been an eventful week, so Timothy, where shall we start?
I'm going to talk about the Olympics. There's a lot going on there, a lot that you're starting to read in the news, and a lot that we can anticipate. I'm going to talk about vaccines and where we are with vaccines and the Delta variant. I'm going to talk about Mr. Suga and his situation and the dynamics going on there. It's really starting to heat up. As I predicted in our last conversation, it's going to heat up a little bit, but not enough to really talk about it too much until the Olympics are over, and then it'll be lots of stuff going on. So even the stuff that's going on now that I will be reporting about does have implications for what to be expecting. And then finally, I'm going to talk about geopolitical. So I hope that Dr. Stephen Nagy is joining us at some point because he has a lot of insight. That's basically his field in any event. So let's get right down to it. But before I start, I've got to give a plug to the guy who is at Sendagaya Station on a hunger strike. I hope people know about this. His name is, he's a Frenchman, Vincent Fichot. He's been there for 10 days. Today is his 10th day. No food, just water. He's got a sleeping mat there, and he's always surrounded by friends and supporters. Only water. So I brought him some cold pressed juice the other day, and he refused it because it contains sugar, and he is adamant about his plight to see his kids. He hasn't seen his kids in 3 years. In any event, if this is an issue that touches you, that you feel strongly in, there's not really much that you can do, but you could show up just to show support any time of the day. Go by Sendagaya Station, you'll see him and many people milling around. It's beginning to become a bit of a press fest because the journalists are in town. They're looking for stories, and this is likely to be one of them. So it's an issue that really needs addressing. And finally, before we get started, the U.S.-Japan climate partnership is an emerging issue between Biden and Suga. They made a lot of decisions about climate change, about carbon neutrality, and my company is hosting a webinar on this issue on Tuesday morning, 8 o'clock Tokyo time. We've got a senior fellow at METI to speak on behalf of what this means for the Japanese, and we have a senior person in charge of this issue from the U.S. State Department in Washington, D.C., and the two of them will have a talk. We'll have a little bit of Q&A, a little bit of moderation going on there. It's likely to go about an hour and a half. So if you can put that in your schedule, if you're curious about it, you can go to maybe LinkedIn or even on my company webpage to find the details. You need to register so that you can get the login details. If you go to my page on LinkedIn or Langley Esquire, either Langley Esquire on LinkedIn or on the webpage. Thank you very much. Sorry for the shameless plug, but it is an important issue for us.
Thank you, Timothy. Just before we start the conversation, let's tell everybody here that today's room is going to be shorter. We'll try to keep it at the most 1 hour and 30 minutes long.
Great.
Yes, so if you have questions and you want to share them and ask Timothy or comment on what he's saying, let us know and we will let you up so that we can keep the room in time.
Okay, thank you, Maya. So first off is the Olympics. Everybody's watching the Olympics. Everybody knows they start on Friday. We have a national holiday this week on Thursday. Then Friday, the Olympics starts. Saturday, Sunday. Monday's going to be a little bit tough because it's a first day of work, and the city will be on Olympic scheduling. So if you decide to come in on the expressway, they've jacked the prices there another sen yen, another 1,000 yen for every ride in or ride out. So they've really jacked that up to keep people off of the expressways, which is funny because with no spectators, that onslaught of so many people is not going to be there. So I think it's a little bit of let's plan for the worst, and then when the worst doesn't happen, let's stick to our guns and make it inconvenient for everybody. There's a lot of press that will be in town. China is sending about 1,000 journalists. The United States will probably send another 1,000 themselves, TV crews, writers, photographers, and that sort of thing. It is causing a bit of a concern among the Japanese government. So they have asked them to register their iPhones when they come in so that they can be followed and made sure that they stay in these bubbles. These bubbles that we've been told by the president of the IOC are hermetically sealed, and there's no need for anybody to be worried about any COVID outbreaks. He said that on Thursday on his visit when he came into Tokyo. He's really started to generate a lot of negative vibes. I think he's in Hiroshima today, which was another kind of unplanned or at least unannounced trip before he got here, which is causing a lot of consternation. The mayor of Hiroshima likes it because it's good publicity, but a lot of other people think it's showboating. And by the way, we're Japanese people, not Chinese people. So we made a little bit of a faux pas when he was having a press conference. Yeah, there's kind of a lot of things going on with him as the individual. He said, that he promised that there would be no COVID cases. And I don't know how appropriate it seems to other people, but he gave a bouquet of flowers when he met Governor Koike, Tuesday. And I just thought that was really, wow. I don't know. In the current state, it's just giving, flowers to the governor. It's just kind of sexist. I don't know. That's the way it hits me. And, yeah, it's really starting to build up the Olympics here. The number of COVID cases among incoming athletes is beginning to it's beginning to build. The Russian women's sevens team is under isolation now because a couple of people were found to have COVID. And then the South African rugby team is also in isolation because they had one or two positives. So they came into the Olympic Village, and so they're somewhat in isolation there. Tokyo has announced yesterday, 1,400 new COVID cases. So it is really building up to be, gosh, like just like the perfect storm. So you think, what else can happen here? The COVID cases are spiking, and the bubble is not secure. The next shoe that could fall, and I think you need to keep your eye on it, is just the heat. So you remember when they decided to do the Olympics, at this time of the year, there was a lot of controversy about the heat and the Tokyo heat and humidity, and with the athletes and the marathon and stuff like that. They had already painted many of the roads on the track that they would be running, and the walkers as well. And then the Olympic Committee decided, let's do it in Hokkaido instead. So that still holds, but for every year in the last 4 or 5 years, hundreds of people have died of heat stroke, and thousands have been hospitalized. And even without spectators, the athletes are likely to be suffering from that much competition, and not just the athletes themselves, but for example, the equestrian that will be run in Tokyo, the horses, they suffer far more than humans in this kind of heat. So it's really a toss-up of what's going to happen. Mr. Suga said that he would be watching from his home. He'd be watching on TV. Koike said the same thing, so probably that's what most people will be doing or should be doing. There's a real controversy that came up. I'm going to talk about a little bit more in politics about lack of liquor sales or closing up the restaurants so that people can't, people won't be going out, they won't be watching on the big screen, that sort of thing. That flopped a little bit and a couple of people got into trouble. I'm going to talk about that when I talk about Mr. Suga. So I think for you to watch out for things that will be coming up, there will be not scandals, but there will be a lot of press reports about things that are not going right, mistakes that have been made. Those stories will most likely not be reported enthusiastically by the Japan press, but with so many foreign correspondents here in town, it will be a focus. So, for example, this French fellow who is in Sendagaya Station, he'll get a lot of attention, I predict. The journalists are looking for that, and they're somewhat restricted from traveling around. The other thing is that I think you can anticipate some really, I don't know, maybe even laughable, but a lot of mistakes, a lot of things that are happening during the time of the Olympics. It happens all the time. You remember in Brazil when it, the pickpocketing and that sort of thing. These kinds of stories will be very illuminating, so it'll get a lot of traffic. And just be prepared. I think you'll be surprised. And by the way, if you see a Ugandan wandering around your neighborhood, please give me a call. And that's said somewhat tongue-in-cheek. I'm glad everybody's speaker is off because you should be laughing about that kind of joke. Ugandan weightlifter came into town, got into the Olympic Village, and then immediately bought a Shinkansen ticket to Nagoya. And of course, they're all watching everybody's movements. Maybe he thought, things are done in Tokyo the way they're done in Uganda. But anyway, thank you. He got away, but he's under surveillance. So these kinds of stories, that you kind of chuckle at them and you wonder, did this guy plan this, get on the Olympic team so that I can go to Tokyo and, get a job in an automobile manufacturing company is my life's dream? I don't know, but there'll be more stories like that. Public interest, of course, for a lot of the athletes, how they got there, what kind of challenges they had to face. But that's, right now, there will be no spectators. That's rather clear. The prospect of them actually canceling the games, if you followed what Thomas Bach has said, he said there is no option for not holding the games. And I think that's been his policy ever since this issue has come up. You might have no spectators, but you are going to have the games, by God. And I think one of the tensions that exists, and it's being picked up by the press, is this tension between, Suga and Koike. They're united on this, and the heavy-handedness by the Olympic Committee. We're going to have the games no matter what. It's for the athletes, and the host city it's a secondary concern. So he's getting a lot of negative press, and that's likely to increase as well. Let me see what else I have here for the Olympics. Well, there will be a lot of potential diplomacy going on with Mr. Suga, but not many heads of state are coming. North Korea is completely pulled out. South Korea is not sending their president because if they sent the president, he would have to have a courtesy call, and Suga has kind of signaled that he's not really that interested in light of the diplomatic row that Japan and South Korea are suffering right now. Joe Biden is not going to come, but his wife, Joe Biden, is going to come. That's pretty firm. I think she comes at in time for the opening ceremony. The sad thing is that the Olympics provides an opportunity for somebody in Suga's position to really showcase himself, get in the newspaper, shaking hands with these leaders of state. And that doesn't seem like it's going to happen. The United States, Canada, a lot of the G7 are not sending their heads of state. France is, by the way. France, Macron will be here. He'll probably be here for the opening ceremony. And there's a lot going on between France and Japan navally with regard to the Spratlys and the policing and the naval exercises, not just here in the Asia Pacific, but also in the Arabian Gulf as well. So there's a lot going on there that has implications for the other parts that of this talk that I want to discuss with all of you. Yep, I think that's about it for the Olympics. If there are any questions, please come up to the room. I don't see anybody that's come up. So I will just slide on through to the vaccines. The vaccines, my God, has it been in the press these days. So Mr. Taro Kono had to apologize because it's on again, off again, full speed ahead, back off, don't go so fast. We were told maybe 6 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, how much vaccines the country had, and also there were stories filtering out that we found a bunch more in these warehouses in refrigeration. I don't know how accurate that is, but what has come out is that Kono initiated with inoculation centers using the self-defense forces. That went very successful, and in fact now fully 30% of the Japanese population have at least one shot. That's pretty good. The Prime Minister has promised by the end of this month that he would have 60% of 60 years and older inoculated. So it's moving very briskly, but apparently there are pockets where supply doesn't meet demand, and they had to back off on that. So you remember that they invited chambers of commerce, hospitals, universities to open inoculation centers, and that fell back, and Mr. Kono had to apologize this week for that. But he did promise, you will be happy to learn, that they are going to integrate the data a little bit better, and for the municipalities and those that are interested, they can get a hold of this data to see where the pockets are. And from what I understand, it will be in an Excel file faxed to whoever is interested. You're supposed to laugh because that's also another joke about the fax machines going on and the resistance to not eliminating faxes. That's one of Kono's promises too, with the initiation of the digital agency. No more Hong Kong, no more faxes. Get the faxes the hell out of here. Let's start doing digital. And I guess the Association of Elder People, or the Fax Machine Association, went back really hard as a lobby group and persuaded the government to back off a little bit on that. So the faxes will be here a little bit longer, but it was just a bit of the joke. The information will not be in Excel form faxed to people, but it just kind of, you shake your head and think that that may be how things roll out sometimes, counterintuitively. Similarly, the vaccine passport that is really making a lot of headway in the EU and in the United States, it's not launched yet. But in Japan, there's no real sense that there'll be a digital passport, one that will be recognized by other countries, because that's what a passport is. A passport is not valuable unless it's part of a multi-country recognition. And as far as I know right now, Japan doesn't have that recognition. So the passport, it's a paper passport. It will be issued probably in August. And it is recognized in Japanese airports for Japanese people or people who live here, foreign people who live here, business people who go overseas and come back. And they kind of get a free pass without having to go through all the PRC tests. But the foreign visitors who are coming in are not going to be eligible, or if they have their own passport, I don't know what they're going to do about a way to homogenize the security and the consistency of that. So that's another issue that's coming up. It will become a hotter and hotter issue in August. in September as the travel regulations are reduced, as the Olympic is behind us. So that's going to be pretty interesting. I don't have anything else on vaccines, although there is a lot to talk about. So hopefully this has triggered interest on your side. You can ask questions. I don't have all the answers, but I follow this pretty quickly, pretty carefully, and if you have interest in it, then maybe we can open a different dialogue. So we've got two more people up onto the stage. Do you want to talk about inoculations or vaccines, Maya?
Oh, I was just, it's a comment, and not so much about the inoculation, the vaccines, but about the no audience Olympics, because Japan has been holding sports events for quite a while now, and even yesterday there was a, was it yesterday? Sorry, but there have been baseball games and soccer games, which have been held with audiences in there. So it's really interesting how they decided to minimize the risk as much as possible with the Olympics by not letting audiences in.
I think it's PR. PR is playing a huge role here. Hello, Hiroaki. Thank you. So there are, I think mostly it's a PR issue. Japan wants to do extremely well, but they don't want to go down in history as the super spreader event of the century.
Yes, indeed. All right, and we've got Nina. Good morning, Nina. Or I don't know if you're out of Japan. Maybe it's evening to you. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, I'm in America. I had a question in regards to what we're talking about in terms of relaxing restrictions potentially in the next few months after the Olympics. I haven't really heard anything concrete about travel, business-related travel, and I wonder how closely it's going to be related to when tourists are going to be able to enter, if it's going to mimic kind of what happened last year, or if they're thinking about having a new approach to how they're letting in, how they eventually will let in foreigners back into the country, or if they're going to restart the program that they had last time. So that's kind of my question, if anyone could answer.
Thank you. Maya, do you want to take a stab? This is kind of your area of expertise. I have some Tabasco to add to it, but this is really where you should go ahead.
Thank you. So your question is when they will actually abandon the restrictions? Sorry. Could you help me with that once again, Nina?
Yes. So my question is in terms of business traveling and things like that, how do they plan on starting to let
Right, okay.
Work?
Yes. So basically, this has been the conversation for a while, and even last year, Japan opened travel corridors with, a couple of countries in Asia. And so this is going to be the way they will restart business travel once the vaccine passports are implemented, and they will be they will be implemented from July 26th this month. And at least that's the plan. And of course, it doesn't mean that people who have not been vaccinated, will not be able to enter the country. They will be able, but they will still have to quarantine for a certain number of days here. And so the point is that, it's not going to be a blanket decision, a blanket opening of the borders. Of course, first they will open the borders to business travelers, as your question is about them. And maybe later, by the end of the year or the beginning of the next year, the plans are to open the borders for tourism as well. But of course, we know that things change by the day here. And even though there are plans at the moment, we don't know what will happen in reality. So, and also, in the beginning of this year, at least, the Japanese government was working on opening travel corridors with Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and Taiwan and Hong Kong. That was, well, some of them were going, they were not officially announced, those negotiations, but of course there was resistance. At least they didn't reach agreements with Australia and New Zealand because obviously, the COVID policies here and there are different, so the principles are different, and well, we'll see what happens. It's not something people were talking about, starting opening the borders to business travelers after the Olympics are over. And
Can I add some spice to that, Maya?
please do, yes.
So this issue, there are issues kind of like this, like the ban on alcohol sales, and the backlash that created, and the reversal of that decision 24 hours later tells you that there's, the Suga administration is not tight, and I think that the travel restrictions will become a candidate for prime minister issue. There is going to be a race for prime minister, and I think the candidate who talks about that issue in a way that is most appealing to the Japanese population or to the LDP population, whichever, if it's the election time or just the appointment of prime minister time, will be a pretty much a defining issue. So there are a lot of people that just don't want the Olympics. They're afraid that everybody's going to die because the bubble's going to pop. And there are a lot of other people that say we need to get back on our feet. The economy is going to stagnate and we need to get back to business. So that controversy, and I think it's a great question. I know we just don't know how it's going to play out. But most likely September, October is what I want to say. But then Maya would probably say, no, it's later in November, December, maybe January. So a lot remains to be seen based on how these Olympics run, what the cases are like, what this new variant does while people are here and after they leave, that sort of thing.
Thank you so much, both of you, for answering that question. That actually, if you don't mind, brought up a kind of question that I have in relation to that. So you said that this could potentially be something that people who are seeking the prime ministership will use. So with that being said,
there will be an election for the lower house, so the candidates for the lower house also.
In the lower house as well. So where do the opinions that you've seen of the Japanese people, where are they in terms of this particular issue? Are they more on the more conservative side of the, staying clear of this for a while, or are they more on the we should open it up a little bit more?
Well, I think you already know the answer to that because you know the Japanese psyche. So it's more like let's take a wait and see approach. Let's not be flamboyant here. I think that's the sentiment that will guide the decision. But then there are a lot of companies that just can't wait to get back and get started. But it's awful scary. I mean, Indonesia passed India in terms of infections. In Indonesia, there are a lot of manufacturing, Japanese manufacturing plants there, a lot of car production plants that are there. The supply chain is reliant on Indonesia, and the country's in lockdown. I mean, 10% of the workers, only 10% can show up at any one time, so production is taking a hit. And also Australia is suffering miserably now. They used to be, everybody's darling, and look how they're doing it. So, yeah, it's anybody's call at this point. And once again, the Olympics will be a critical a test for where the sentiment of the Japanese population will go. So just keep tuned.
Okay, thank you.
Raz.
Good morning or good evening.
It's actually morning in India. I'm from India.
Good morning to you. Okay. What's your question or comment today?
Yeah. So I can see that you people are from Japan, and there are various Japanese automotive manufacturers such as Toyota and Mazda and Honda. So, what is the present state of electric vehicles manufacturing in Japan, and compared to the Germany? I guess Germany is already way ahead. So, what are your insights about the automotive industry and especially about electric vehicles in Japan?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch you. What industry are you thinking about? Electronics, did you say?
No, electric vehicles.
Oh, electrical vehicles, right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. This room is Japanese politics. It does have an implication towards electronic vehicles and the supply chain, that sort of thing. But we only talk about those when they become truly political issues. So if you don't mind, it's not in my ballywick, electric vehicles dress.
All right, man. It's not an issue. I just
Thank
want
you.
to know about present governance of Shinzo Abe. How is it from your perspective, from insider's perspective?
Please stay tuned. I have a special item that I'm going to be talking about under the heading of Mr. Suga.
All right. So, Mr. Timothy, can I know, what is your actual nationality? Like, where do you come from? Are you from Japan?
Draz, that's been an issue that we've talked about to death on a couple of other rooms. If you don't mind, let me just kind of pass over that. Just do a search on Timothy Langley, and it's not the one that's in jail right now. That's supposed to happen later in the year, but it's the one that's running a business in Japan on government affairs and public policy.
Right.
Link in with me on LinkedIn. Thanks, Draz.
Thanks.
Hiroaki, did you have something? Ms. Yoshino.
Yes, sorry, I was just talking with the security guard right now, but thank you. Langley-san, お久しぶりです. Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, and Maya-san, pleasure to meet you.
So,
It's a
just
pleasure.
to set the stage here, Hiroaki, you're working on, you're on the Olympic team inside the U.S. Embassy, right?
Actually, I am working now, and I am in the van. So I am alone, actually beside the driver, so that's the reason why I'm able to speak with you right now.
Great.
But,
Can you give us an update? I know you want to hear about what's going on between Kato and Suga. I'm going to address that. But give us an update on what you're seeing now.
I'm sorry. What you ask again, please?
Anyway, welcome to the room. You had a question, but your question was about Kato and Suga, right?
Yeah, sorry. I'd like to apologize because I'd like to ask you the question not regarding the topic today, but before before the start. So Maya-san and Timothy-san, Langley-san, you were talking about the relationship between Suga and Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga, right?
That's right.
And I was very surprised. They don't even talk to each other. So that's
funny.
So that's behind the scenes. So no media do not report such stories as far as you know. So if you don't mind, would you mind sharing the stories? Anything seen behind the scene? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much. So that is actually my next topic, unless somebody wants to come up on the stage and ask about my cooking skills or about what my yoga training regime is or something like that. But if not, then we can go to Suga, unless there are any other pertinent questions about either the Olympics or vaccines, and then let's roll into Mr. Suga. Encourage me, Maya.
Yes, let's continue with the next topic.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Suga, he is kind of in the doldrums. Actually, visually, when you see him in press conferences these days, it does look like somebody's giving him a good shot of energy. He looks better. His face looks more expressive. he seems to be more on top of his game, but boy, is he getting his butt kicked. The report from the monthly poll that was conducted was released. It said he's 32% popularity. So that means the actual number is probably lower than that. But the other thing is that his disapproval rating is shooting up. So there are a lot of people, they say, do you kind of like, are you ambivalent, do you kind of dislike, or do you really dislike? And the amount of people who are opposed, so that's everything under ambivalent, that's about 43%. That's huge for a prime minister. So he has announced boldly on Friday that he is going to run for prime minister. I think you might have seen that. That's a huge announcement. It is about time. He was going to make that in any event. It is probably unlikely that he would just resign, or he wouldn't run to succeed himself. So he announced that he was going to do that, as many suspected or anticipated that he would be doing. So that does a couple of things. It tells the people that are in his cabinet that if you aspire to the prime minister's position, and you're in my cabinet, you cannot, you can't do that. So any person who is in the cabinet who would like to challenge him has to resign first. So that's the first kind of given there. The second given, it's not a given yet. It's being touted about, and many influential in the LDP are suggesting, with Mr. Suga in such a poor position, what he should do after the Olympics is reshuffle the cabinet. So then he would go into the election with a new face of the cabinet. But even when they do that, it's not a full warehousing of getting people out. It's a couple of key positions, maybe environment, maybe foreign affairs, potentially METI, but it's not going to be wholesale. There might be 5 or 6 new cabinet ministers. But for example, if some of those people are removed through their own invitation to Mr. Suga or to the LDP, or by design, it does free them up to challenge him. And that the list of challengers is beginning to grow. The other thing that Hideaki asked about is this kind of quiet news that there's turmoil in the cabinet office. And it has been going on actually for a while. You might remember that when Mr. Suga launched actually when he became prime minister, he pointed his finger at the minister for the digital agency, or the creation of the digital agency, and to Mr. Komatara, and said, I want you guys to be talking frequently, on a daily basis, you guys should be talking. And he also pointed to Nishimura, who is the economic affairs minister, and also Komatara, about how we're going to deal with COVID. So Nishimura has responsibility for the COVID response, and Komatara has the responsibility for the vaccine response. And those two are fighting a lot. You can see some of the innuendo that they use when they're talking. It's kind of not snide, but it's like, he's not doing his job and I'm doing my job. And the reason we can't do it is because what they're doing there. So there's tension between there. There's tension between Mr. Suga and his chief cabinet secretary too. And you figure, how can you run a country when you've got these kinds of things going on? But the reason for that is because Mr. Suga came into power not as a vote of confidence by his LDP peers. He was inserted by Mr. Nikai, and there's a tremendous fight going on between Nikai and the Abe coalition, the 3 A's. Abe, Amari, Aso. And so they're in a bit of a coalition, and it turns out now that it's not 2 parties fighting against each other. It turns out that there are 3 parties fighting against each other. There's the 3 A's, there's Mr. Nikai, who is cozying up on this thing with Ms. Koike is just beginning to develop into such a blooming flower. We got to talk about that too. But Mr. Suga, on his own account, is beginning to exercise his own discretion. And the fact that maybe Mr. Kato was inserted as his chief cabinet secretary. I had always thought that they had a good relationship and that it was his selection, but apparently not. Apparently it's more of a Nikai selection. And so that's created tension because some of the things that Mr. Suga wants to do, he's being held back, and that is being controlled by the headquarters inside the LDP. So these are just signals. It's just the ripples on the water, but the stuff that's going on under the water is tremendous. So like Hiroaki said, you know, the national press is not talking about it. You're only reading this through Bunshun or through some of the scuttlebutt that you might be hearing if you're dabbling in Japanese politics at any depth. So it will bust open once the Olympics are behind us. I think that out of respect and out of the hope that we can, you know, carve something good out of the Olympics, people will be withholding their passions until that's finished. But in fact, it's an unmistakable fact that Tokyo and the national government are going to take a bath with the Tokyo Olympics. The ticket sales, they don't have enough insurance to cover the cost of the ticket holders who were supposed to pay for a good portion of the Olympics. And probably there's going to be a lot of people who have tickets who take them to be refunded, and there's not going to be any money there. There'll be a lot of problems that come out of that. But anyway, getting back to the Chief Cabinet Secretary and Mr. Suga, this is building up into a fight for the cabinet posts, for the timing of the election for the lower house, 467 members of the lower house, and the timing between that and the election of Prime Minister. I think the election of Prime Minister will be pushed to the very end. Mr. Suga wants to make sure, you know, he's got to rely on the successes that he's had, and they're very, very few. The first one is the establishment of the digital agency, which was a huge success, done in lightning speed, very successfully done. And the other is the inoculation of the most at-risk population, that's the 60s and older, people who are 60 years old and older, the inoculation there. And he'll probably get maybe 70 or 80% of that done by the end of the Olympics. It doesn't help the Olympics, but it is an achievement. So he's trying to push off the time of his election so that he can wave the flag and say, look, I established this, I did this, I inoculated here, and these are the successes that I had. But there's a lot of other things that are going to be detractors. And this is probably a good time to talk about what's going to happen with Mr. Abe, what are the kind of machinations that are going on there. So you don't know until the fat lady sings. Everybody knows that. But a lot of the thought now, you know, Mr. Abe, a lot of people think, I mean, when it first came out, Mr. Abe running for Prime Minister, oh, come on, he's sick, he's not going to do that again. It actually had a lot of appeal when you think about it a little bit. And he's active, he's lobbying, he's collecting money for his candidates in preparation for the upcoming election. He's a very successful campaigner. And he's kind of like the Trump of Japan. Wherever he goes, people acknowledge him, and they understand that Mr. Suga is not Mr. Trump. I'm sorry, is not Mr. Abe, and doesn't carry that kind of prestige. So if Mr. Abe really wants to become Prime Minister, I predict that he could become Prime Minister. I think that's not what he wants. I think what's going to happen is he is now not the most senior, but he is one of the senior members of the Hosoda faction, which is the largest political faction within the LDP. I think there will be massive changes to restructure things. I think that there will be a cabinet reshuffle and an election, and then party posts will be distributed, and that includes the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. And I think Mr. Hosoda will give up his position as the leader of the Hosoda faction, and he will become the president of the House of Representatives president, which is a great position. He's at that age in his career. It opens up the Hosoda faction to then become the Abe faction. And I think for most people listening here, rather than being the king, it's probably better in Japanese politics and in history to become the kingmaker. And I think that's probably the play that Mr. Abe has decided on. And he can kind of pretty much call the shots. I mean, it was his grandfather who established this faction, Mr. Fukuda, and then it changed hands a couple of times, and finally the name is Mr. Hosoda's, but it's known by several different names, Seiwakai, Kenkyukai. But it is the largest by far political faction, and is probably the one that will determine, just on its own standing, 90 members to determine who will be the next prime minister, because that election happens within the LDP. But there will be horse trading going on. Who is going to be candidates? The second biggest would be Mr. Aso and Mr. Nikai. So there's tension there, but Abe and the Aso faction combining together could defeat a Nikai faction. So a lot is, and it's complicated. Even just listening to myself talk about it, I understand it's difficult to follow. But we have an election for governor in Hyogo today, and depending on how the LDP does there, it will have an inflection to the election for Yokohama mayor. That is a huge fight that's going on there. I don't know if you're following it, but in the papers tomorrow, see who won in Hyogo for the governor, and then we have the mayor's election in Yokohama in August, and these will tell you very clearly the winds of change blowing at the LDP. A lot of people say the LDP is not going to do very good in this next election. I don't know. It's hard to call right now, but the LDP could do extremely well. The opposition parties are united. They've learned a lot of lessons in the last several elections where they beat the LDP, the coalition with the communists and the Democratic Party of Japan, and also the Constitutional Democratic Party. They're really being sophisticated about their election tactics, and so you can see, or you can anticipate, that there will be some real knockdown, drag-out fights, and that the opposition parties will increase their standing there. With that, let me just end on Mr. Suga. There's a lot more to say, but probably the questions will determine the better place that we could spend our time. This has been going on for 50 minutes now, so I'd like to open the room on that, and then we can get into the geopolitical. Hello, Dr. Nagy. Welcome to the room. So let's handle the Suga situation, Mr. Abe, the elections, the politics, that sort of thing, and then roll into the geopolitical. Maya?
Yes. Well, I haven't gotten any notices from people
So
in
Maya's
the
sleeping
listening.
at the wheel.
Sorry? Yeah.
Are there any questions that we can talk about with Mr. Suga? I know there's a lot of interest there. I got a lot of people coming on the room. Hi, Maya.
Hi, we've got Rumiko and Ren. They just joined us, so Rumiko, good morning.
Good morning, Maya. Hi, Timothy. Thanks for your insights again.
Thank you.
Just wanted to ask you about, I'm so sorry that I couldn't follow up, lots of political news like this week. And previous week, I believe that you were mentioning about the election of mayor of Yokohama City, which might be affecting the, dynamics of the LDP.
Very much.
Yes, yeah. So I would like to have a little bit of more insight from the Yokohama City's elections perspective towards this current situation, if you don't mind me. Yep, thanks.
Okay, that's kind of like putting a fork into an electric socket. If you've never done that before, I invite you to try it, Rumiko. This is such a electric issue, and it's because, number one, Kanagawa, if you look at all of the politicians who come from Kanagawa, it is amazing. Mr. Suga comes from Kanagawa, Amari comes from Kanagawa, Konotaro comes from Kanagawa, and they're all in election districts that are almost contiguous with each other. And Mr. Suga has already staked his claim that he wants to see the casino law passed. the casino law has faced a lot of opposition because there's a very powerful don in Yokohama, as you know, who is opposed to it. And I think he's opposed to it because he's just waiting to be, bought off so that his opposition will dwindle, because there's so much energy, there's so much money, there's so much motivation to establishing the casinos in Yokohama. It would be a great engine for economic development. There's no doubt about it. It would change the entertainment industry in Japan as a first step. It would probably take maybe 10 or 15 years, a couple of new rounds for lotteries of regions that would host these. But I think it's an idea that has great merit. It would boost so many things. Wedding ceremonies, theatrical plays, a lot of other things that have nothing to do with gambling. But Mr. Suga is hot for it, but the candidate from the LDP is not hot for it. And he's on the other side, and Mr. Suga is supposed to endorse him because he's the LDP candidate, and there are other candidates there too. So if he supports him, even though knowing his opposition to the casino, maybe the LDP will win, but he personally doesn't get what he wants out of it. So there's a lot of quiet horse trading going on there, and this LDP member is resigning his position from the lower house to take that position. So he has a great potential for grabbing that position, and the tension there is, what's Mr. Suga's stance on that? That's a little bit of the spice to it. I can get into a little bit more deeply probably in a couple of weeks, not next week. Next week is going to be taken up by, mostly we're going to talk about the Olympics and what's going on in the Olympics, and I'll try and weave in some of the other issues. But I think next week this room will be consumed by Olympics news. I hope that touches upon the issue, Rumiko.
Yep, definitely. Thank you so much. And I would like to follow up with you on that, from the perspective as a citizen of the Kanagawa Prefecture. Yeah, personally. Thank you.
Great. I'm a citizen of Kanagawa too, so thank you. Hello, Ren.
Hello. Hello, Ren.
Hey, hello, Maya. Hello, Timothy. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Good.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for letting me speak up here.
Where are you calling from, Ren?
I'm calling from Philly. No.
Do you never sleep?
No, it's 7 o'clock. It's almost 8 o'clock. It's still very early. Do you go to bed?
Okay.
Do you go to bed at 8 o'clock? I don't think
Great.
you do.
Well,
Yeah.
we always appreciate you showing up. Thank you very much.
No, fine. I have a curious question here. A very simple, short question. Among all these chaotic situation that you just mentioned, which was really insightful. Who do you think, which politician in Japan do you think will gain the most? Not necessarily mean he's going to be the next prime minister, but the political gain in terms of the magnitude, including some of those politicians who may have fell out of favor. For example, Ichiro Ozawa, maybe he can take the advantage of this situation. Who do you think would take the advantage of this situation more than anybody else?
It's an interesting question, and I appreciate it because I've thought a lot about it too. And the answer is not one that I really like, but I hear it enough that it would be Kishida that is the one who comes out looking the best and who gains the most out of this kind of controversy that occupies the kingpins. I keep hearing his name as the better candidate to Mr. Abe or to anybody that is promoted by Mr. Nikai, and his star seems to be rising, although in terms of electioneering and winning elections, he hasn't done very well. There are a lot of detractors, but with the big elephants stomping all over each other, there is an opportunity for somebody coming out of left field, and I think that's him.
That's interesting. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's counterintuitive as far as I'm concerned. It's not a result that I like because I would like to see some of the more prominent, bigger guys go toe-to-toe. I'd like to see Konotara, I'd like to see Amari, I'd like to see Abe. And how this decision is made is really important to the nation of Japan. So I'm keenly interested in it. Sorry to interrupt you.
I was just going to ask, since you mentioned Amari, do you think he can come back from that scandal, real estate scandal? Do you think that far is behind him already?
I think it's already behind him. I think it's already behind him. They have a saying in Japan, washing the feet, right? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and in the U.S. maybe washing hands. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think his feet have been washed from that earlier scandal. And you remember he went, he went silent for several months. He went into the hospital, and then he came back out. I mean, he's a great politician. He's really strong. He's very smart. I think he's a great politician, and I think he deserves to have more of a role. But he doesn't have a faction. He doesn't. He's already kind of assigned to a faction. But I think there are a lot of politicians you should be looking at. Hayashi is another one.
Hayashi-san was in a room the other day, by the way. Interesting enough, I was surprised.
Go ahead.
He was speaking in a very gentleman tone. Didn't speak like a politician. That's the first impression that struck me in a different clubhouse room.
Oh no, he's a great guy. Yeah, he's very approachable. Great guitarist. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan.
Well, if there are any other questions or comments, please let us know, and we will let up on stage to speak. If not, Timothy, we can continue with geopolitics.
Okay, great. I invite Stephen to come up on stage so that you can tell me where I'm wrong on the geopolitical stuff. So there is a lot going on geopolitically here, as we talked about, the opportunity for the Prime Minister to not play politics, but actually to take advantage of diplomacy with all of the leaders and all of the representatives coming in for the Olympics. There's been a lot of water that's been poured on that. He's not going to be meeting with the president of South Korea. He's not even going to come. He was going to come, but the invitation was not very warm. President Moon, please come visit us and let's have tea. There was no invitation like that. It's like, why don't you come, sit in the stadium and sweat while your team plays in the Olympics. So there was no warm embrace of him coming. Most of the other heads of state are not coming into the country. So the opportunity for him to really shine and really have, when you're in a tight spot, diplomacy is always a good, safe place to gain points and gain sunshine. And so that opportunity is not going to be for him. He'll probably spend time with Jill Biden when she's here, but I don't know how many points that's going to score for him. And so a lot of the others are not going to be so great. Also, he did meet with the IOC president, Thomas Bach, but that just didn't roll off very well. Bach made a bit of a faux pas about, thank you very much for welcoming me, Chinese people Japanese people, right? That kind of thing. And you can imagine the hair on the back of everybody's neck just kind of stood up when they heard that. I mean, what a faux pas. But, that kind of thing happens. He's a busy person, but he's not very well liked. The fact that he claims, I guarantee that there will be no COVID and it'll be a safe Olympics. Who the hell is he to talk about that? He doesn't even know, telling the Prime Minister. So the diplomatic opportunity for Mr. Suga is not very rich, and we will roll from the Olympics and the Paralympics almost immediately into the summer of love. I say that with, tongue in cheek. It's not going to be a summer of love. It's going to be a knockdown election of the lower house, then an election for Prime Minister, change of the cabinet, change of, the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate. A lot of things will be going on. September, October, there'll probably be a lot of shakeout in November. You might even see a cabinet reshuffle before all of this happens. Immediately after the Olympics, a cabinet reshuffle and a speech to the nation where he announces a maybe 2 or 3 trillion yen stimulus budget. So there's a lot going on. But geopolitically, China is really on the move in terms of what's going on in Hong Kong. They're kind of really exercising their muscle there. They're not in the shadows as much as they used to be. They are being much more aggressive, and also the state cyber committee on handling companies who are dealing with data going overseas and having particularly to the United States and launching initial public offerings. That has been really put a break on, and the Chinese government is beginning to bring all of that wealth back. I think the game here, and I'd like your comments on this too, Stephen, is trying to break away from the U.S. Dollar dominating world trade, and I think that is one of the end games to make the yuan more recognizable, and also moving very aggressively into a digital currency. Let me see what else I've got on that. You've noticed that Indonesia has surpassed India in terms of COVID cases, and the Prime Minister, even on the cusp of, Mr. Kono, apologizing for the go fast and then go slow with the vaccines and all of the inoculations that we have that are stored, that aren't at the right places at the right time. He's also said, we're going to be shipping more vaccines to other countries to help them in their plight. That means Indonesia and also India. But the supply chain is really the top burner within the United States, within Japan, and the emergence of Quad. Quad is starting to take on a lot more of a bodiness. I mean, it's beginning to start to come together. The Australians are starting to put more initiative to that, talking about the digital transformation and how we're going to be able to protect ourselves from cyber attacks. And the Biden administration, Mr. Suga's administration too, is moving very quickly to a carbon neutrality agreement among all of the G7 and in fact the EU countries as well. We've got a COP conference I believe it's in Brussels in October, and it will not only deal with carbon neutrality, but also this issue of a global tax that's being touted by the Biden administration, and it seems to have appeal with a lot of countries so that the rich don't get to move to other tax preferential jurisdictions and not pay any tax. So it seems to be hunting territory for the GAFA, the big data companies. They are getting really kicked around, and it's not just in the United States. It has implications everywhere, and I think it also has implications to what China has decided to do. And just beyond that, the sweeping crackdown in Hong Kong is very worrisome. The United States and Japan issued a joint communique to attempt to bring China back to the arbitration decision of, I think it was 2016, on keeping the South Pacific shipping lanes free, and the Chinese are encroaching on that. And an arbitration panel found that they were encroaching, and to stop that, and they just kind of, gave it the one finger salute. And so Japan and the United States once again issued a communique. So there is a lot of energy being devoted to that. The forces are beginning to get aligned. it remains to be seen what China's stance will be, but I think knowing how they do things, it's just going to be a slow, steady creep. And their economy is just, it's growing by such numbers that they could probably insist on doing what they want to do just through the sheer weight of their numbers and the economy that they have. The only final thing that I would point out here, and we don't talk about it much, what's going on with the United States and Iran. That seems to be a hot point. There was an attempt to kidnap an Iranian journalist in the United States. That is really huge. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, Carlos Ghosn went out of the country in a huge suitcase. How would the Iranian secret agents be able to whisk somebody out of the United States? It just begins to boggle the mind. Anyway, with that, geopolitically, Japan is still standing in the crosshairs and at the crossroads. A lot will be determined. There's a lot of energy and a lot of effort being put into the naval facilities and the joint operations between not just Japan and the United States, but with all of the other EU countries. Stephen, help me out here.
Yes, sure, Timothy. Good morning to you, and good morning to Maya, and good morning to everybody on the call. So I think there's some really interesting ongoings right now, and I think that there is a possibility for an Olympic boom for Prime Minister Suga in Japan. And I think they have to do with outside drivers of really assertive behavior from China. And I'm not sure if everybody is aware, but just this week, the Chinese arm of the Communist Party voiced a very stunning view in that they said that there was a Japan nuclear exception if Japan continues to support Taiwan, that the Chinese government would attack Japan with a nuclear weapon if they continue to attack Taiwan. So I do think that this kind of rhetoric plays very well for the LDP and for conservative voters that are concerned about the growing presence of China. Not only its financial presence, not only its presence in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, but this growing assertive rhetoric, and it touches upon the holy grail for Japan, a nuclear attack. So I do think that's really interesting, and I think that it's going to play well for the LDP. It's going to play well for Mr. Suga. On the note of Taiwan, we will have a Taiwanese representative visiting Japan for the Olympics, and I think this is also something that will be played up in the press. It will stress the shared democratic values of Taiwan and Japan, and I think this will play well with the ordinary Tanaka and Suzuki. And why I say that is that there's growing concerns about China within the region and what does it mean for Japan. Lastly, and I think importantly for the Olympics, Timothy and Maya and friends, is that I do think that this is not going to be a super spreader event. I think that it will be seen as well organized. It will not be, of course, the Olympics that everybody wanted, but it will be the Olympics that will be safe, the Olympics that will show sport, and the Olympics that will spotlight Japan for the next 2 or 3 weeks for the Olympics and, of course, the Paralympics. And I think that this will go down in terms of a solid performance for Japan. This seen hand in hand with the vaccination rollout in Japan, which has really accelerated. All the vulnerable people have been mostly vaccinated, and of course people in their 40s and 50s are receiving their coupons and making their appointments to get vaccinated. This is all good timing, I think, for Prime Minister Suga in terms of demonstrating some competence in governance. So the outside pressure of China, the good dynamics in terms of international leaders coming in, and the gradual but accelerating vaccination program, I think is going to provide some dividends for Prime Minister Suga. Lastly, and I think maybe Timothy mentioned this in the first 30 minutes, I wasn't here, but I do think that the LDP has learned a tremendous amount from the revolving prime ministerships following Prime Minister Koizumi in the early 2000s. We had 4 or 5 prime ministers within that amount of time, and of course we had the DPJ become elected. And this period of time where the LDP saw inconsistent leadership, a revolving door leadership, really has taught them a lesson that it's really important to maintain consistency in the leadership and in policy. And, they accrued enormous amount of dividends with Prime Minister Abe as leader for 8 years. And of course, that is a mixed legacy, but I think overall it's relatively positive for Japan. And I do think that's a real motivating factor for Japanese politicians in the LDP to think twice about beginning a process where we'll see a revolving door of prime ministers if Prime Minister Suga does get booted from the party. But I'd sure love to hear your comments on that, Timothy.
No, thank you very much, Stephen. I completely agree with you that the LDP highly values the attributes that a long-term Abe administration gave them, and that spiritually they think having a longer-term prime minister is a good idea. But just like a bunch of kindergartners, I think that only holds true if it's my guy, not your guy. And I just don't think that they can help themselves. I think the higher likelihood is that, it will be a revolving door. They'll slip back into that. Mr. Abe was unique in that he was able to hold on to it for so long. Everybody says, but it's Mr. Abe and there's nobody else in the wings. There are a lot of people in the wings. It's just that in Japanese politics, it's unpolitic, it's impolite to stake a claim, to say, I would like to be prime minister and I think I could do a good job. That's just not done. So you don't know what kind of leader it is until he's actually in power and he has a couple of months under his belt. With Mr. Suga, we understand and understood him to be a adroit administrator, but being an administrator and being a leader of the country are two different things, as you can see with the lack of communication between him and his chief cabinet secretary. So there are a lot of fractures in the makeup, in the walls, and I think he's open to a lot of attack from people who are his friends, his frenemies within the LDP. It's not the LDP versus all of the opposition parties. It's the internal fight that goes on within the LDP, which makes this room so interesting, because that's kind of where the fight is, in the personalities, who these individuals are. So you'll keep hearing the names over and over again, because these fellows, they don't die, they don't go away, they don't have a 4-year term and then go sell insurance. They typically stay as a politician and amass more and more political power and more kudos and more cabinet posts, so that they too can become prime minister. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. I'm curious if that's the calculation, because there is a deep bench. I think Motegi has a positive and a good track record in terms of accomplishments. As you mentioned, Amari, he was the one that really forged the TPP moving forward, and is seen as not only somebody that can function on the international stage, but also the domestic stage, understanding stakeholders within the domestic environment. And I think he's really someone to watch. Kishida is the head of the policy research division, which gives him experience working with all the different factions. Although I do think he's a bit of a vanilla in terms of personality, and this could be something that is seen as a strike against him within the party. But again, the real question is who is former Prime Minister Abe rooting for, and does his partners, Aso and Amari, are they on the same page of the book? And I think that will really play out in terms of thinking about where we want to move, or where the party's going to move forward. Another point that I want to touch upon, because you mentioned the Permanent Court of Arbitrations decisions in the South China Sea earlier. So this was a decision in 2014. It was a decision again, basically rejecting all of China's claims in the South China Sea. And it was brought up by the Philippines, a small country, as everyone knows, against a very big country. And it's really illustrative of why it's so important to have international law and a rules-based order in the region. And we simply want law to be the arbitrator of how we function in the international domain. And I think this is why the decision against China was so important. And as you mentioned, Timothy, China universally rejected the decision, saying that it was not a decision based on law, but on bias. And they engaged in a lot of actual shocking behavior, claiming that one of the judges, the Japanese judge, was biased in the decision. But 5 years on, we've seen China dramatically change its position in the South China Sea. No longer it's focusing on militarizing islands, but it's enhanced what we call gray zone operations. So using merchant vessels to swarm and surround ships of the Philippines or the Vietnamese. It's using drone technology within the South China Sea. And it's really built up its capabilities. And it's a concern. And it's a concern because I think that we're having a challenge in terms of how we are robustly pushing back against that sort of behavior by the Chinese, whether it's through the Quad, as you mentioned, or the United States working with Japan and Australia and other allies, or the European Union and its individual countries sending ships into the region. And that's important. We've seen the UK, Germans, the French, even the Canadians have been in and out. And I think that's important. It's not just the United States and Japan that are concerned about these issues. We have a growing consensus of countries that are saying this behavior that threatens the stability of sea lanes of communication, those important arteries that allow for energy resources to move in and out of the region and import and export of goods in and out of the region, are potentially going to be subject to some kind of friction within the region, potential accidental conflict, or an intentional kinetic conflict. And this is a really big concern, and I think this is going to be an area to watch. Lastly, I'll just say another area that I think is really critical that we should be watching is the Taiwan. Why Taiwan? I think that Taiwan is the center at this particular stage of, I think, the geopolitical competition between China and the United States. It is the home of the Taiwan Semiconductor Company, which produces the most sophisticated semiconductors that are in military grade technologies. And the United States and Japan and other countries are very concerned about what this means if Taiwan does eventually fall under the influence of China, whether it's through forced reunification or otherwise. And this is going to make Taiwan an increasingly sensitive place where the United States and other countries push the envelope in terms of their bilateral relations with Taiwan. And this will, of course, incense Beijing. And Beijing will put more pressure on Taiwan and more pressure on Japan and Australia and the United States in various ways. And this is a real hotspot that we should be watching. And I encourage everybody to keep their eyes on that spot because it's just an incredibly important part of the geopolitical puzzles that are in the region.
Hey, Stephen. Hi.
Hi, Rand.
Stephen. Hey. Do you still think that strategic ambiguity should continue or should end?
So I think that strategic ambiguity can move hand in hand with forming different kinds of informal and non-state-to-state relations. And a really good example of that is Japan. Japan does not have formal relations with Taiwan, but what we see is Japan has encouraged various associations, non-state actors, to tighten relations with Taiwan. And the best example of that is the Taiwanese Fishing Association and the Japanese Fishing Association, which have jointly decided to be able to exploit the resources in and around the Senkaku Islands. And I think these kinds of creative ways allow Japan and other countries to maintain that strategic ambiguity vis-a-vis Taiwan, but at the same time, it allows them to strengthen the bilateral relations at the most important level, at the grassroots level. And I think that's going to be a continued process moving forward to try and balance that delicate dance between the one country policy that all countries have when they engage with China, but their increasing recognition that Taiwan is an important partner within the region and that needs to be protected.
Yeah, I guess my question, I should rephrase my question to be a little bit more straightforward. If our country in the United States stopped the strategic ambiguity toward Taiwan? Do you think it's going to hurt Taiwan more or helping Taiwan more? And why? And then the related question is, what was your opinion about Kurt Campbell's most recent remark about, hey, we actually do not support Taiwan's independence?
So I think in the United States is probably its best interest is to continue some form of strategic ambiguity vis-a-vis Taiwan. And why I say that is I think there's a timeline here. The current administration is trying to get an assessment of the comprehensive power of China. And I don't mean just military power. I think what we're trying to think about is what's happening within the Chinese economy, what's happening in terms of state-owned enterprises. Is China really a competitor, and is it a competitor for the long term? And I think the one line of thinking is yes, that this is a decades-long competitor that we're going to have to go through extreme competition, and it's going to be competition in the military domain, technology domain, digital domain, cyber domain. But another argument, and I think it's quite a strong argument, is that the next 5, maybe 10 years, is that the domestic contradictions within China, the aging population, the Communist Party really putting pressure on the private industry and controlling private industry, that it's going to make it difficult for China to compete with the United States toe-to-toe economically, but also in terms of innovation. And above and beyond that China's going to have to pay for social welfare services for its aging population, and that these domestic contradictions are going to really handicap China's ability to compete toe-to-toe with the United States. So if you have these two arguments, bookending how you're going to view your relationship with China and how you want to engage with Taiwan, then you better have a pretty good sense of which China you're competing with. If it's the decades-long competition with China, then probably strategic ambiguity vis-a-vis Taiwan is a better option. If you think that China is going to be is weak, that those domestic contradictions are going to dramatically slow its ability, deter its ability to compete with the United States, then your position on Taiwan may be somewhat more concrete and move away from strategic ambiguity to some kind of position where you recognize Taiwan as I won't say an independent state, but Taiwan as an independent actor within the region. And I think that the United States right now is making that assessment, and it's going to probably move towards what I said in the latter in terms of its calculation vis-a-vis Taiwan, because they understand that it's really a red line for Beijing. And Ren, can you go back to your question? Your question?
No, I was just curious about your comment or your opinion.
Kurt Campbell's comment.
Kurt Campbell, his most recent comment, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So Kurt Campbell, I think he has a really deep understanding of the region. He was on the team that put together the pivot to Asia. And he is what we call the Indo-Pacific czar. He's the guy that understands that's implementing the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States. And I think that his opinion is that not doing Taiwan as an independent state is meant to send a strong signal to China that we will respect your red lines as long as you maintain the status quo. The moment that you move away from the status quo, and that's a message for Beijing and Taipei, that our position will change. And I think this is consistent with this is consistent with the United States foreign policy vis-a-vis China and Taiwan for decades, is that they support the status quo, and they don't want Taiwan to promote independence, but of course they don't want Beijing to push reunification through force. And this is consistent throughout the Biden administration's initial 6 or 7 months. The U.S.-Japan statement between President Biden and Prime Minister Suga, it referenced the focus on peace and stability in cross-strait relations. The G7 communique voiced the same expression. The Japan-EU communique also voiced the same expression. So all of these are a real delicate dance, but the key commonality is that they're saying status quo is what we want, and we won't accept a forced reunification.
Right. And since this room is about Japan politics, right? What would you recommend the Japanese politicians to watch or consider what to do with Taiwan based on the three countries' positions: China, Taiwan, and United States?
Well, Japan's in a delicate position because, as you know, most of its imports and exports and natural energy resources come through the South China Sea, up into the through the straits or around Taiwan and into the East China Sea and up into Japan. And Japan's position vis-a-vis Taiwan, if it's too overtly supportive of Taiwan, Beijing will cause problems in the East China Sea and in the South China Sea, and this could disrupt the Japanese economy quite significantly. So I think that Japan understands that liability, and as a result is going to continue to proceed forward in terms of strategic ambiguity until the United States makes a firm and concrete and committed decision on how it wants to move forward on Taiwan. And I think that is ultimately what we should be waiting for. What is the action of the United States, and how will other countries fall in line with that? Now, the chances that the United States is going to alter its position, I think, is very low. And what that means is that Japanese politicians will probably be wagering that they don't need to change their position vis-a-vis Taiwan at the state level, but they'll continue to strengthen relations at the corporate level, at the non-governmental level, and in terms of those joint institutions, like the example I gave you in terms of the fishing associations. As you know, Japanese politicians are cautious, but they're also pretty well versed about these issues, in particular the ones that are on the foreign affairs committees. And that's my expectation moving forward.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Great analysis as always. Thank you very much. Thank you both of you for coming up onto the stage to talk about this. The only thing that I would add to that is that the chief petitioner, the Philippines, on the Permanent Arbitration Court in The Hague, has been very cozy with the Chinese as a consequence of their Belt and Road strategy with the bridges and the infrastructure projects that are going on there now. So nothing is static. Nothing stays. You know, the Chinese are very, very adept at what they're doing. Mr. Aso went on TV the other day saying, you know, if Taiwan is attacked, you know, Japan will come to their aid. And that was a very strong statement coming from him. So the key here is that you just, like Stephen said, you've got to keep on top of it. Just keep watching it. It doesn't need to be an obsession as it is with Stephen and me, but you know, stay tuned, follow this room, and yeah, there's an awful lot going on and more to be expected.
Yes, thank you for that, and thank you, Stephen, for the analysis. Well, I think it's a good time to say and inform everybody in the room that we're going to have a room. Thank you, Tim. That we're going to open a new room series in September with Stephen Nagy, Dr. Nagy. So it will be about the Indo-Pacific and Japan's role in it. And please stay tuned. We'll be
great.
Thank you. We'll be announcing it well in the coming month. So and then Hayato, good morning.
I have a couple of things I'd like to add to the comment about Suga, and also about the geopolitics. One about the Suga succession is we have this 50-50 chance, or maybe 60-40, of Abe running for the third time. And there's discussion going on daily, and he's up and down, and he does not want to run because he's comfortable, he does not want another scandal, and he feels like he has to run because the attack the world, China is getting more imminent daily, so that Japan has to start to revise the constitution probably this year to start arming itself for the war against China. So that's the kind of drama that's going on every day.
Great point.
And,
Great point.
Right. And also, you probably heard this, right? And also that K-Government, all the business association, they all signed up last week to back Abe, right? So if he runs, the 100% of the business is going to support Abe with no competition, right? So that's the one addition to the previous comment. The Mr. Suga, I don't think he has any chance at all. I mean, that's what we heard. Also, Amari is also weak, so he's not going to be a much player, right? And also the other player. That's one. Another one regarding Taiwan is about 10 years ago during the first Obama administration, and there was negotiation. The U.S. was going to give the Taiwan back to China in exchange of investment by the China into the U.S. Treasury, because the U.S. is always in need of more funding. Right? So that was the agreement that that's going to take happen in 50 years from then. So that's 40 years now. Then again, the condition there was that China is not going to be the challenge of the U.S. Primacy, right? And also Stephen mentioned that Chinese is can be is a great competitor, but U.S. does not see that way, as I know. So if you ask any general, they're going to ask for the enemy. They'll say whoever that's going to challenge the U.S. the dominance of U.S. currency as a key currency. So that, as I mentioned the other day, which are like China, Russia, Iran, right? And we used to have two more, right? Like Libya and Iraq. But look what happened to Libya and Iraq, right? And I mentioned this before that the Iran is they're entering into a treaty with the U.S. in a commercial treaty, so Iran will not be the enemy anymore, right? And Russia only have a GDP equal to Tokyo, Saitama, Kanagawa, so they won't be the enemy in the war, right? So the only enemy with the United States is going to be the China, right? And what's going to happen probably going forward now is what happened before the World War II with the Japan and the United States, meaning that like we are seeing now already, which is that China is going to, well, the U.S. first, like the U.S. signed the law, pretty much prohibiting to invest the Chinese major business, right, in the United States, right, in the investment. So and the same thing happened before in the World War II. So Japan will not do business with anybody in the United States. The U.S. will not do business with anybody in Japan, right? So that's what's going to happen in China, and that's what's going to happen with the United States, right? And also just this is not much important, but even Hollywood, so the government will not, sell the movie studio MGM to Chinese government, and also the United States, government forced the Chinese to sell the stock ownership in AMC, which is the largest network in the United States, right? So those things are really happening, right? So for that one, my boutique, I am a co-founder in LA. We kind of represent the Chinese government, to negotiate for the studio. But yeah, and then we have 1/3 of the business in the United States federal government. So can we do on this kind of negotiations? So there are a lot of things taking place, but it looks like we're still getting into the collusion. Right? So that's I'm done talking here. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayato. Always great to get your insight. I don't have much to add to that. It's just another flavorful observation about what's going on, what to watch. Thank you very much for contributing.
Hey, Maya, because I know we are pressing the time, but can I share
Go ahead.
points?
Yes,
Can I share 3
please.
points? Yeah, 3 points from Nikkei. I was reading this article. I find it interesting enough to maybe share with everyone. It's written by Mr. Nakazawa of Nikkei, who is the head of the China news station in Beijing for Nikkei, and he mentioned a lot of things about this most recent Didi. Didi couldn't, this New York Stock Exchange things, and then China came in. Yeah. That news. And he mentioned in this article that was kind of interesting. 3 points only, just to share. He mentioned that we all see this as a sudden move from China, but this is actually a very well calculated move by the Chinese government, right? And he mentioned, first thing he mentioned that was kind of eye-opening for me was that this announcement from the Chinese government is a co-announcement between two organizations within the Communist Party. One is the General Office of the Chinese Communist Party, and the other one is the General Office of the, what's the other one? The other one is the General Office of the State Council. I'm sure Stephen knows the difference between the two, but this is actually a joint statement by the Chinese government. And what that means is usually the organization that controls the business transactions for these tech companies in China is controlled by the Keqiang, which is a state council, which is a prime minister of China, state council of the People's Republic of China. But this time it went over his head into the General Office of the State Council, which also controls all the personal information about important Chinese Communist Party's important the top members, their blood type, DNA maybe, and all these kind of things are controlled by this General Office of the State Council, which is like a big secretary office for Xi Jinping. So this council and the General Office of the Chinese Communist Party they jointly try to they jointly wrote this huge document about how they are going to control the tech industry. And so the last point is, why are they doing this? They are trying to, according to Mr. Nakazawa, they are trying to show that by 2022, the Chinese big gathering, the Kyosanto Taikai, they want to show that they were able to control the tech industry in China, because that's the only industry that is out of Chinese Communist Party's control. If they think that by 2022, if they don't do it, the control is going to be getting out of their hand. And so even though this seems like a sudden move, but this is a well-calculated move toward 2022. And this is an interesting observation for me, and I hope this is insightful for the people in this room as well. And Stefan, you may want to ask something if you notice something from Mr. Nakazawa's report.
Thanks very much, Ren. And I think what your comment is really important for us to be thinking about the broader political dynamics within the Chinese context. And I think that you focused on how the Communist Party is concerned about the tech industry, and I think that's true. But they're really they're concerned about any alternative to a power center within the Chinese context. And as you know, as a business becomes more successful and more powerful and more wealthy, it has more tentacles into society and more supporters. And that I think the Communist Party understands that any kind of large business or organization that is influential enough to be a competitor for the party is a risk. And what we've seen over the past 5 or 6 years is it's not only tech firms, it's not only Alibaba with Jack Ma being silenced, the former chair, or he's still a chair of Wanda Corporation, one of the richest men in China. He was silenced for being critical of the party. And we've seen him almost disappear from the public scene. We've seen other prominent billionaires and company heads being silenced by the Communist Party. And this is the strongest message that although the business communities have been welcomed into the party during Jiang Zemin's era, under the three represents idea that that they must serve the party, and when they deviate from not serving the party, that the party will ensure that that changes quite quickly. So I do think there's a tech side to this, but I do think it's broader Chinese politics that has created these conditions, and that should be in mind if we're if in Japan or the United States or Canada, when we're dealing with business in the Chinese context, is that there will always be a relationship with the party, and Japanese businesses and others need to have a very good understanding of what are the political dynamics. And in Japanese you say 雰囲気を読む. But you need to understand what are the dynamics of that business and the party, and how can they change suddenly, and is that business partner in China in line with what the party's doing. And I think it's something really that we're going to need to think about much more moving forward. And that kind of jumps off what Hayato said when he was talking about who is the competitor. And I think that we should be very clear the competitor is the party, and businesses that support the party. And when we're thinking about that competition, we're thinking about tech, we're thinking about the digital environment, we're thinking about engaging with our Chinese competitors. We need to keep that in mind, and that's really, really critical. And at this particular stage, China is the most competent competitor for Japan, the United States, and I think most like-minded countries. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Stephen.
Oh, hi. Can I ask something there?
Please go ahead.
Okay. So, this China, or mainland China, it's like Japan used to be in Showa era. So there's always this mikajimerio or kickback behind that they have to pay to the politician or the leader of some power. Otherwise, they are out of the power. So when there's a big shift in this kind of politics all the time, then there'll be always kind of fight behind in this kind of a mikajimerio or kickback as who gets paid. Yeah, so there are a lot of fights behind. So what happened in the case like Alibaba is just not him, but he has this mobster behind him, who is going to protect him, right? So that the power is weakened, and there's other parties that mobster that's going to move in, and that's what happens. It can be military leader, it can be political leader, but one of those guys.
Yeah, and Hayato, the point that this controlling organization is now jumping over Li Keqiu, isn't it? Li Keqiu's head is a sign of what you just said.
Yeah. So that could mean that because when Xi Jinping, right, and there's a Li, they became the president and the prime minister, there is a borderline that they pull, right, which is the Xi Jinping control the energy, right? Then there's a Li control the business. Now the Xi Jinping is going to move into business and take Alibaba. That's what probably happened, right? Yeah. So for that, there's a fight like this all the time. Oh, by the way, so I also before we represent one Qualcomm, right? In China, so Qualcomm has 50% of the global revenue in China. But we have this kind of political, mobster behind that was losing power. So the Qualcomm almost lost the business license. We have to switch it and negotiate. So this kind of thing happens all the time in China. And not just the power, but also the light too. Right, from that book.
Well, just kind of pivoting back to Japan, I think it's really interesting. And if you followed how Japan manages Japan-China relations, it's been a party-to-party management strategy. And I'm sure Timothy can help me with this as well. But the LDP and the CCP has really, really close relations. And, Nikai-san is a very good example of that close relationship, having pipelines to deal with the challenges of China. And we saw when the DPJ was in power from 2012, until 2009 to 2012, that the DPJ didn't have those pipelines into the party. And as a result, Sino-Japanese relations deteriorated very, very quickly. And when Prime Minister Abe came back into power, of course, he could use those pipelines to try and normalize relations or stabilize relations over time. So looking at the party in China today from Japan's point of view, because I think this is a real discussion about Japan, is that Japanese leaders and the LDP are thinking about how the internal politics of the Communist Party are changing and evolving, and what does this mean for the traditional ways of dealing with this challenging relationship. Nikai's sun star is on it's fading, not just because of age, but if you've looked at policy positions of the Japanese government over the past 6 months to 5 years, gradually hardening position towards China. So how does Japan move forward in terms of negotiating these bilateral relations with the Communist Party as the the glue that's allowed them to communicate, that's the LDP-CCP relations, gets weaker and weaker. And this is a question that many of us are thinking about. Who do we go and talk to within the party now to get a good sense of how to solve issues, or how we can frame our relationship, or where are the productive sides of the relationship we should invest in. And this has become much more complicated under Xi Jinping. And I think will become more complicated at the 20th Communist Party conference in 2022, because what I think we will see is that the Standing Committee will be basically, all the members will be replaced with Xi Jinping's men. And individuals such as Li Keqiang will probably not be part of the Standing Committee, and that means that his wing of, or his faction within the politics of China will not be there. So there's a lot to think about this in terms of where Japan and how Japan engages moving forward with China, because the traditional platforms or pipelines for communication are becoming weaker and weaker.
Yeah, Stephen, just one quick point to Stefan's point. I understand Nikkai's your point about Nikkei, but based on China's strategy or behavior, do you really think anybody in Japan can do anything about repairing the relationship, or should I say, I don't think anybody in Japan can do this based on how Xi Jinping is handling the matters.
So here, then I think it's really important for us to be thinking about China beyond Xi Jinping, and think about how local governments are feeling about Japan. And when you go to China and you go to speak to local governments, they are really anxious about losing Japanese investment, losing those connections with Japanese businesses that are hiring local people, providing some human capital development. And this has happened for decades, right? So they're very concerned at the local level of what's happening with Sino-Japanese relations and China relations in general. So the pushback is internally. And Xi Jinping, although he's very powerful, does have to make ends meet. He has to ensure that the economy works. And if he puts a nail in the coffin of Sino-Japanese relations, all those local leaders are not going to be happy, because they won't be able to provide for their citizens. So I think that there's some internal dynamics that we need to be thinking about. And as Japan is thinking about its bilateral relations with China, I think one of the areas that it needs to be thinking about is how to strengthen those local ties with local Chinese leaders, so that those local leaders continue to value Japan and Japan's investments and stability in the bilateral relations. And frankly, over a long period of time, China has always been its weakest when its local leaders are stronger. But it's also curbed Chinese power. So I think that Japan's approach is going to be sophisticated, and it's going to look at how to strengthen regions so that those regions can resist the centralization of the party and the country. And this is a long-term strategy, and I don't think Japan can do it alone. It's going to have to work with the United States and Australia and like-minded countries to ensure that that there's resistance within China against China's Xi Jinping's more unilateral and assertive behavior.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Ren. Well, I can see that the discussion for the room starting in September is building up, which is great. So, well, and yes, we are looking forward to actually opening it. So there is just 1 month or so until then. And then I would like to proceed with, wrapping up the room. Well, today we talked about 4 topics. They were the Olympics, the vaccines, Mr. Suga's standing, and, well, of course, the politics within LDP and geopolitics here in the region, with the great input of Dr. Langley. Thank you very much, Stephen. Timothy, thank you very much for the great presentation today again. And thank you very much to everybody who came up on stage and commented and also, joined the discussion. I'm going to close the room in a couple of minutes because we're 20 minutes past the intended time to end it. Timothy is going to sail today again. And well, we are looking forward to seeing you again next week, next Sunday at 8 o'clock, or probably 8:30 or 9 o'clock, whenever you wake up in the morning. Thank you very much again, everybody. We wish you a great day and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you. Thank you. What a great room, Maya.
Well, it was thanks to you and everybody who is up on stage. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
And to everybody,
And
yes, go ahead.
No, while people are signing off, people frequently say, you know, Japanese politics, it's so difficult. I don't understand it. I don't know how to get involved. You can get involved. There's an issue going on right now with a foreign fellow whose children were parentally kidnapped by his wife. He's on a hunger strike. He's holding out on his own, day 10, without food at the Sendagaya station. If you would like to know more about this issue, it's becoming a hot issue. If you have the time or the inclination, please go out and pay him a visit, show your support. This is a huge issue that I think for those who have lived in Japan any length of time, you've heard the horrible stories that are there, and you know, please weigh into it. Please generate a conversation about parental kidnapping here.
Thank you for that. Well, so
you're closing the room.
yes, no, that's perfect. Thank you, everyone. Yes, once again.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen.
Great job as always. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. See you. Bye.